Hello, and thanks for joining Prism English.
Today, I'm going to tell you a story. Not a fairy tale, not a dream, but a story that really matters. It begins with a boy who had nothing. No family, no home, no future. But he had something no one could take away. A dream. This is the story of how that dream changed everything. He was born in silence. No crying mother, no proud father, no visitors, no name. Just a nurse holding a newborn baby with wide-open eyes on a rainy Thursday morning, wondering what kind of life this child would grow into if he survived. They gave him the name Eli. It was short, easy to remember, and no one else in the orphanage had it. He didn't know what it meant, and no one told him. But the name stuck. From his earliest memories, Eli remembered hunger, not just in his stomach, but in his heart. The orphanage fed him enough to stay alive, clothed them enough not to freeze, but never enough to feel human. The walls were gray. The food was gray. Life itself, at times, felt colorless. But Eli had eyes that never stopped moving. He watched people. He watched birds. He watched rain slide down windows, as if hoping that the water might wash away the bars and let him out. He didn't cry when he was punished. He didn't speak when others shouted. But he remembered everything. While most of the children fought over leftover bread, Eli sat alone, whispering stories to himself. Stories he invented, heroes he imagined, worlds he'd never seen. He had no toys, but he built castles in his mind. No parents, but he dreamed of voices that would call his name gently. No money, but something richer than gold. A belief that there was more. At night, when the lights went out, some kids cried. Some fought in the dark. Eli just lay still, staring at the cracked ceiling above him, thinking of questions no one could answer. Why was I left here? What is outside that gate? What if I could leave and never come back? The orphanage was a place of routine. Wake up, wash, line up, eat, obey. But one rainy afternoon, something unexpected happened. While cleaning an old hallway, Eli noticed a door that had always been locked before. This time, it was open. Curious, he stepped inside. It was a library, or what was left of one. Dust-covered shelves, broken chairs, torn pages scattered like fallen leaves. But it was the first time he had seen so many books. He picked one up. The cover was faded, the title unreadable. He couldn't understand a word of it. "You like books?" came a voice behind him. Eli turned, startled. An old man stood at the doorway, wearing a janitor's coat. His name was Mr. Rowan, and he'd worked there for decades, mostly ignored by everyone. I can't read," Eli said, ashamed. Mr. Rowan nodded. "Then today's a good day to start." From that moment, the dusty library became Eli's secret world. Every evening, after chores, he would sneak in. Mr. Rowan would teach him a few words, then a few sentences, then whole stories. He devoured them. He read about people who crossed oceans, climbed mountains, invented machines, and changed the world, all starting from nothing. He read about loss and love, betrayal and hope, war and peace. He began to understand that the world wasn't just one story. It was millions, and he could be one of them. More importantly, he discovered something powerful. Books didn't care who your parents were. Books didn't care how much money you had. If you could read, you could dream. And if you could dream, you could choose who to become. Years passed. Eli grew taller, his face sharper, his hands steadier. But deep inside, he remained that boy who watched the world. Only now, he was no longer just watching. He was planning. At 16, he was forced to leave the orphanage. The government had no place for him anymore. He was handed a small bag, a list of shelters, and a final meal. "Good luck," said the director. "Most don't last a week out there." Eli didn't respond. He just nodded, held his bag tight, and walked away without looking back. He had no family, no money, no guidance, but he had three things: a notebook filled with ideas, a worn copy of The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and a promise he made to himself every night since he was 10. One day, I'll never need to beg for a home again.
The city was loud, louder than Eli expected. Horns, shouts, sirens, rain. He arrived at the downtown shelter just before midnight, soaked to the bone. They gave him a thin blanket, a bowl of soup, and a cot in a crowded room that smelled of sweat, mold, and despair. That night, Eli barely slept, not because of the noise, but because he was afraid. Afraid that everything he had dreamed, everything he had read, everything he had hoped for, was just a fantasy, a foolish idea. Because outside books, the real world felt brutal. The next morning, he went out with the only two possessions he hadn't lost: his notebook and his book. He walked for hours. Every store he entered asked the same question: "Do you have experience?" "No," he answered honestly. "Sorry, we're looking for someone with more background." Eli didn't have a background. He had shadows, dust, silence, books. That was all. For 2 weeks, he lived off leftover food from cafes, slept under bridges, and stared at buildings made of glass, wondering who the people behind those windows were, and if they had ever been hungry, like him. Then one day, something shifted. While sitting near a small electronics shop, Eli noticed a man struggling to carry boxes inside. The man looked exhausted. No employees in sight. Without asking, Eli ran up and said, "Let me help." The man hesitated, but then nodded. They moved boxes, dozens of them, heavy, full of wires, gadgets, spare parts. By the end, both of them were dripping in sweat. "You work fast," he said. "What's your name?" "Eli." "Got a place to stay, Eli?" "Not really." The man paused, then pointed to the back of the store. "There's a supply room. It's not much, but it's dry. You can sleep there, if you help me unpack every morning." Eli nodded. "Deal." That man's name was Omar. He owned the shop, and had run it alone for years. He didn't talk much, but he noticed everything. Eli worked every morning before sunrise, cleaned the shelves, reorganized stock, repaired what he could, and most importantly, watched. He watched how customers talked, what they bought, what made them hesitate, what made them smile. He kept notes. By the end of the first month, Omar handed him an envelope with $120 inside. Eli had never held that much money in his life. That night, Eli didn't buy food. He bought a used laptop. With free Wi-Fi from the public library, he began to learn everything he could. How businesses start, how websites are built, how to market products, how people think. He stayed up late every night, eyes burning, brain on fire. He didn't care about sleep. He had slept enough in his life without a future. Now he had something worth losing rest over. One evening, after closing, Omar looked at him and said, "You ask more questions than a journalist." Eli smiled. "I'm just trying to understand how all this works." Omar leaned back and said, "Then maybe it's time you tried something." Eli's first idea was a failure. He created an online page to sell used electronics, but no one trusted him. His pictures were blurry, his writing awkward. The page had no followers, no traction. No one cared. He quit after 3 weeks. But the second idea was different. He remembered how customers often asked Omar for help with gadgets, not just buying, things like setting up phones, recovering passwords, upgrading software. So Eli created a new page called Tech Buddy, simple help for real people. He used simple words, bright images, friendly videos, and it worked. Not a lot, not at first. But one woman booked a $10 service, then another, then a man who asked him to fix a laptop. Then someone hired him to clean out old phones and back up photos. One day a message came in. "Can you train my mom to use her smartphone over video call? She's 67. Eli said yes. The mother cried afterward, grateful she could now talk to her grandchildren abroad. Eli kept building. He learned video editing, customer service, branding. In 6 months, he had over 300 clients, all from word of mouth and trust. He wasn't rich, not yet, but he had a steady income, a rented room, clean clothes, food he chose for himself, and more importantly, purpose. He even began mentoring others at the shelter, showed them how to do what he did. Then came the first investor. A man named Daniel Lee booked a consultation under a fake name, pretending to be a confused customer. But after 20 minutes of speaking with Eli, he revealed the truth. "I don't need tech help," he said. "I've been watching your reviews. Your clients love you. I think you've got something bigger here." Eli froze. Daniel continued, "What if I gave you $50,000 to scale this, hire people, build an app, grow beyond video calls, think global?" Eli couldn't speak for a moment. "Why me?" he whispered. Daniel leaned forward. "Because you understand people, not just machines. That's rare." That night, Eli sat with his notebook, the same one from the orphanage. He turned to the very first page where he had once written, "I want to build something that matters." And next to it, he added, "Now I will." Eli didn't take the money right away. He spent 2 nights walking, thinking, remembering all the stories he'd read in that old library. Stories of people who made the wrong choices when the right ones felt too slow. He remembered something Mr. Rowan once said: "The fastest path up can also be the fastest fall down." But in the end, he called Daniel and said, "Let's build something, but we do it right." Daniel smiled. "That's why I chose you." The first year was chaos. They rented a small office space above a pizza shop. The walls were thin, the furniture second-hand, and the team consisted of Eli and two others: Maya, a brilliant coder who believed in the mission, and Luis, a former client who was once homeless like Eli. They didn't have fancy equipment or startup parties. They had instant noodles, black coffee, and endless whiteboards. But they had vision. The app they built was simple: Tech Buddy, technology with heart. Instead of just tutorials, it offered live, kind, patient help for people left behind in the digital age. Grandparents, struggling parents, immigrants, workers with little tech experience, they all found a place in Eli's system. Within 6 months, downloads crossed 100,000. Soon, they were featured in tech blogs. A journalist wrote, "In a world chasing AI, one startup chose humanity." Investors started calling. They offered millions. Some wanted control, some wanted him out. Eli listened, politely, then walked away. He had one rule: we grow, but we don't forget who we're growing for. But the more they succeeded, the harder it became to protect that rule. One day, a top investor offered $20 million to buy 60% of the company. It would make Eli rich overnight. Maya was thrilled, Luis was cautious, Daniel said, "It's your choice." That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He sat on the floor of his apartment, nicer than anything he'd ever lived in, staring at his old notebook. He flipped to a page where he had written, "I don't want to be rich, I want to be useful." The next morning, he declined the offer. Success didn't slow down, it accelerated. Tech Buddy expanded across countries. Schools adopted the platform. Government offices used it to train older staff. It became more than an app. It became a movement. Eli started speaking at conferences. His story inspired thousands. People introduced him as the Tech Whisperer. He laughed every time. "I just listen better than most." He had money now, more than he knew what to do with. He had a car, a loft, and people who called him sir. But none of it changed the one habit he kept. Every night, he read books about psychology, business, culture, pain, hope. He believed the more he understood people, the better he could help them. Then came the collapse. Not of the company, but of Eli himself. At a major global conference in Singapore, after his keynote speech, he received a call from Luis. "Something happened," Luis said, voice shaky. "There's a leak, a data breach, and the press already knows." Eli flew back immediately. The next week was a storm. Headlines screamed, "Tech Buddy fails to protect data." Critics questioned his leadership. Clients deleted their accounts. Investors panicked. The breach wasn't Eli's fault directly. It came from a third-party plugin. But in the public eye, the captain always goes down with the ship. For the first time in years, Eli felt like that boy again. Lost, blamed, powerless. He spent nights in the office, alone, staring at the wall. Maya and Luis stayed by his side. Daniel came back to help handle PR. But the wound was deep, not just in the company,
but in Eli's soul. He began questioning everything. Was I just lucky? Am I really helping anyone? Did I build something or just play pretend? One night, he found himself walking near the old shelter where he once slept. He stood outside for hours. No one recognized him. He didn't want them to. Then he noticed a boy sitting alone on the steps, thin, shivering, holding a book far too advanced for his age. Eli approached gently. "That's a big book." The boy looked up. "I don't understand it, but I like the pictures." Eli smiled. "What's your name?" "Zeke." "Where are your parents?" "They're gone." For a moment, Eli couldn't speak. He took off his coat and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders, then sat beside him, under the cold streetlight, sharing silence. The next morning, he called a meeting with his entire team. He said one sentence that no one expected. "We're not just fixing the breach, we're changing the mission." He explained his new plan. Open learning centers in shelters across the country. Hire teens from difficult backgrounds as interns. Launch a new branch, Tech Buddy Future. Free digital education for orphanages and foster care systems. His team asked, "Won't that lose us money?" Eli replied, "Maybe, but we'll never lose purpose again."
2 years later, Tech Buddy Future had reached places no one expected it to. From small villages in Southeast Asia to refugee camps in Eastern Europe. From shelters in Chicago to orphanages in Kenya. The project had spread not like a tech product, but like a movement. Eli no longer led from an office tower. He led from the ground, visiting classrooms, speaking with children, shaking hands with janitors, librarians, and teachers. He said yes to coffee invitations from school staff and spent more time listening than talking. Because Eli had learned something the world often forgets. Innovation means nothing if it doesn't reach the forgotten. He no longer wore suits. He preferred simple shirts and a canvas backpack. His wealth was handled by a trusted foundation. He drew a modest salary, donated the rest. But what fulfilled him most wasn't the donations or awards. It was the stories. Like the 9-year-old girl in India who used TechBuddy to learn English and now taught her own mother how to read. Or the 14-year-old Syrian refugee who fixed a community computer and built a local digital library from salvaged parts. Or the boy in the Bronx who created his first mobile app through TechBuddy lessons and later got accepted to MIT. Each one reminded Eli of himself. But it was a letter from a small town in England that would change everything. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. The paper was old, the handwriting shaky. "Dear Eli, you may not remember me, but I was the janitor who taught you your first letters in that forgotten library. I am an old man now, close to the end. I've lived quietly, watched from a distance, but I saw your name in the papers. I watched your speech online. You speak with the same hope you had in your eyes at 12. I just wanted you to know I always believed in you, even when the world didn't. Thank you for making the silence we both came from into something the world can hear." It was signed, Rowan. Eli's hands trembled. He hadn't heard that name in more than 15 years. The next day, Eli canceled his meetings. He searched for Rowan,
and found a nursing home in a quiet seaside town. When Eli walked in, the staff at the front desk looked at him with disbelief. "You're that Eli?" He smiled gently. "Only if he still remembers me." They led him to a room at the end of a narrow hallway. The door was open, curtains drawn to let in the late afternoon sun. An old man sat in a chair by the window, eyes cloudy but alert. And then a small smile. "Still watching the world, boy?" Eli laughed. He hadn't cried in years, but he cried that day. They spent the whole evening talking about books, the library, the children, the storms they'd both survived. Rowan said, "I never thought I taught you anything special." Eli shook his head. "You didn't teach me words. You taught me to believe I deserved them." Rowan smiled, closed his eyes, and said, "That's all any teacher hopes for." That was the last conversation they ever had. Rowan passed away 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep. Eli arranged the funeral, paid for a proper burial, and placed a single book on Rowan's coffin, The Alchemist, the same copy he had carried all those years. Inside the cover, he wrote, "To the man who gave me my first sentence and helped me write the rest of my life." In the months that followed, Eli didn't slow down. He continued building, but in a different way. He no longer tried to be the face of anything. Instead, he lifted others, helped them start their own journeys, mentored ex-cons, trained foster teens, partnered with libraries in forgotten corners of the world. Every year, on the anniversary of the day he left the orphanage, he returned, not to the building itself, it had long been torn down, but to the street where it once stood. He would sit on the steps of a nearby school, notebook in hand, and write a letter to himself, always beginning with, "You were never broken, just waiting to become." Years passed. TechBuddy became a global name, but Eli remained the same, soft-spoken, observant, always listening. One day, a journalist asked him, "You're a billionaire now. What does wealth mean to you?" He paused, then replied, "Wealth is the ability to leave doors open for others, especially the ones that were closed on you." And perhaps that was the truest thing about him. He didn't become a billionaire because he chased money. He became one because he chased meaning. And when the world gave him a platform, he built bridges instead of walls. Because once upon a time, in a forgotten corner of the city, there was a boy with no name, no parents, no home, but a heart full of stories, a dream no one could see, and eyes that never stopped looking for a way forward.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Prism English. We'll see you next time, where English isn't just learned, it's lived.